and welcome to Talk Business, and a big hello as well to our viewers across the region receiving us through Sky Pacific. On the show tonight, we travel to the continent of Europe, to Budapest in Hungary. Talk Business covers the recent Global Development Network conference that examines issues of urbanization and development in cities across the world. Join us over the next half hour as we take a look at some of the pressing issues future cities of the Pacific face, and also a tour of the historical city of Budapest. The future of our world lies in our cities. By 2030, it's estimated that around 60% of the world's population will live in towns and cities. This will rise to 80% by 2050. Here in the Pacific, it's a similar tale. Currently, 40% of our population live in urban areas. This will increase to 50% this year. This raises serious issues, especially when the world's population staggers at 7 billion people. As our population increases at a rapid pace, so does development, which hastens the rural-urban drift. But urbanization brings its own unique challenges. Higher levels of contagious disease, housing, congestion, and crime, which often seem far beyond the capacities of many governments to manage. Well, members of think tanks, researchers, heads of government, representatives of national and international organizations were brought together by the Global Development Network to explore this topic. The venue, Budapest, Hungary. A range of issues surrounding urbanization and development were put to the floor, which spurred on greater dialogue between researchers and budding policymakers. For those influential in shaping public policy in our part of the world, there was no short of debate.
If urban centers are given prominence, if governance structures, proper planning, then urban centers can become, growth poles for economies, and for people who are migrating from rural to urban areas, will find that they can make a living in a much more decent way.
Because the city is where you get your ports, it's where you get a lot of your legal services and your insurance services. You've got to make sure that the city is functioning in order to also have a really good productive investment in those agricultural and mining sectors in rural areas. So it's simultaneous, it's not an either or. You've got to do these things together. And actually we're quite lucky in the Pacific because we can think like that and we can see it and we can work like that, because the scales that we work on compared to other countries, other regions, are actually relatively manageable.
It's an issue that resonates on many levels when you take into account our population growth.
More than 1 billion people will be, will be moving in the next 30 years. So this is critical, and it's critical for many reasons, because cities have very good, the economies of agglomeration of cities have very good externalities, are very good characteristic for the individuals. That is why they move. But we have also to see that there is a lot of very negative externalities like crime, congestion, pollution.
People no longer see urbanization as a negative thing. I think there is increasing realization that urban growth itself can be positive, but there are caveats to that, in terms of how governments are able to put in appropriate policies to address some of those externalities.
And that brings into play a bigger issue. With so many people leaving their villages and settlements in hope of living the big dream in towns and cities, the question then arises, where will they be housed? This obviously gives rise to squatter settlements and slums, which are quite synonymous now to urban centers. The pressure then on governments and municipal councils takes a leap, especially when you factor supplementary development of roading, sanitation, and infrastructure into the equation.
How you transform slums into social housing is another main issue. Why? Because sometimes, there is some tensions by displacing, people at the beginning in order to construct, the social housing, or they are displaced in places that are far away from their jobs. So it is a complex issue that requires our priority. GDN is at the moment preparing what is called a global research project on urbanization and development, and social housing will be one of the main issues that will be analyzed.
The whole issue of giving people the sense of ownership, the sense of belonging in a town or a city is absolutely vital. And there are, this conference I think came up with a lot of discussion on appropriate policies, not only about land policies, about policies in terms of how governments can develop a planning architecture or a process which will help them to ensure that there is appropriate provision of housing, especially to the poor and those living in the informal sector.
You need to be doing different kinds of planning all at the same time. Clearly, like for instance, watershed planning, which is actually a key issue to look at in terms of understanding flooding. It's not just about climate change. It's about what is happening in the watershed. How is it being used? How is it being managed? How is it, what kind of agricultural activities are happening in that watershed, or tourist activities. So it's a much more complex set of planning tools that we need to have, because they've got to be integrated across a number of different agencies. So yes, so it's not just the town and the council, it's also who's in charge and who's doing activities in that watershed, and there needs to be an element of participation in that.
But that's not the least of our problems, especially for our vulnerable islands in the Pacific. Given the phenomenal change in weather patterns and our rapid population growth, it's virtually impossible not to take our environmental concerns to the round table. It's an area those spearheading innovative research agree needs a lot more thought.
Much more is needed. The research on the linkages between the environment and the cities is a very new one. So we have done at the moment a lot of research on natural disasters and climate change at the macro level, but at the micro level we are just starting. And I hope that GDN, in a partnership, for example with ODN, the Oceania Development Network, and other partners, we can be pioneers in some sense, analyzing at the micro level, at the city level, also those issues. But it's a very new research topic.
We're still trying to discover how best to handle some of these issues. So there's a lot of learning from one city to another, one bit of research to another. But it's exactly right. The point about city living is it's very complex. So there are lots of things you've got to get right before it's tolerable.
With a population of just under 7 million people, Papua New Guinea is an economic force to be reckoned with. No doubt the powerhouse of the region with its abundant mineral resources. The challenges, though, often mirror its size. You see, with a land area of just over 450,000 square meters, much of the country remains underdeveloped and as rural settlements. That's why the push to urban areas is stronger. In fact, around 13% of PNG's population live in cities now, placing heavy demand on its housing system, subsequently pushing rental and market value of homes through the roof.
We've had much economic growth and the LNG gas project that has brought in a lot of workers, and so that has pushed up the price of housing and the demand for housing, existing housing. So housing prices have more than, it's about 10 times or even more, increased 10 times or more over the last 4 or 5 years. And so it's pushed public servants and even executives out of good housing because it's no longer affordable into the squatter settlements.
However, the bigger issue here is land tenure. An overwhelming 97% of land in PNG is classified under customary titles, and the remaining 3% freehold land can only be held by citizens. This has created a new set of problems, especially for a country that's growing beyond its seams.
Those that land were bought from previous customary landowners, those people have been alienated from their own land, and so they live on the peripherals, and many of them are part of the urban problems that instead of we have urban villages who are the customary landowners of, for instance, Port Moresby, Lae, and the big cities, and they're not benefiting from the land, and they see a lot of developments going up, and the land rentals and all the economic benefits are going to businesses and government, and so we need to create mechanisms so that these people are also benefiting from the developments that are happening on their land.
There's no question that appropriate government policy is crucial, especially where economic development is concerned. And for a situation that's as sensitive as this, a tailor-made social housing policy is all the more critical.
If we can get good laws, good governance mechanism into land, so that the bank and the financial institutions know that the risk factors are reduced, I'm sure that we can bring in more capital into housing and be able to develop properties and provide adequate housing for everyone that needs it.
I guess the central bank plays an important role here.
The central bank plays an important role, but so do the financial institutions themselves, the banks and also the supernation funds that have lots of money for development, and we can, because a lot of workers are also the obligatory contributions to the super funds, and so the super funds linked to housing and so on, we can explore those mechanisms.
Fiji's land system is equally complex, with a controversial history. It's a model that also needs a bit of work, especially when you put into context urban development and planning.
That has to be tackled, and you're right, that is a major issue. I think Pacific governments, Pacific policy makers have to bite the bullet, have to think about how they can deal with urban land zoning, urban land titling, urban land leases and ownership, because if you do not have a system of land acquisition, if you don't have a system of land leases, if you don't have a system of land ownership, which supports not only private investment in housing, but also which allows government to acquire land in an appropriate way so that it can provide land for housing for those who may not be able to afford themselves.
I think the Fijian model, the weakness is that it's managed by one central agency, and that central agency then manages. But in the incorporated land group, we have every incorporated land group can register a piece of land and then develop it, and it's banked in the lands department. The titles and everything is managed by the lands department, and the lands department then will the transactions occur outside. The property rights are recognized by the lands department and the state.
So there's always landowners who still have that upper hand.
The landowners will always be the owners of that particular land.
When you examine the issue of urbanization, especially here in the Pacific, you cannot ignore the other side of the coin, When people flock to the cities, there's a good number that actually return home to their rural settings, leaving a huge gap in our skilled employment sector.
You get, as we spoke about, different kinds of housing situations. You're getting continued crowding of housing, but you're also getting the growth of new squatter settlements, and that's a concern and can be seen in many places. However, there's one other trend I think that we're seeing, and that is the retirement of the kind of first generation of public servants in the Pacific. And the question there is, are they going to stay in the city? Are they going to stay and continue to contribute to the city? Or are they going to go back home?
And these are skilled workers.
These are skilled workers. These are people who are going to start retiring. These are people who have been contributing to superannuation for a long time. Are they going to take the superannuation back with them to rural areas, or are they going to continue to live in some of our urban areas?
A little over 100,000 people make up the scattered islands of Kiribati, hardly a figure that boggles the mind. But for the small island nation where resources are scarce and the very heart of their existence at threat, it's an issue that's become a growing concern. Rising sea levels has given birth to a global phenomenon that didn't quite exist some 50-odd years ago in Kiribati. Residents have been affected with changing weather patterns, forcing many to change their way of life. But as research by John Cochrane has revealed, Mother Nature isn't behind the urban-rural drift here.
Yes, at the moment we cannot just say that people are moving because of climate change.
As the urbanized center of South Tarawa feels the urban density pinch, so too does its government in providing sustainable housing.
Housing is provided by the government. Most of the housing in South Tarawa, are provided by the government through the housing corporation. But there are other private people who are now providing the same same thing, that's housing to other people. So at the moment there's the private and there's the government that are providing houses on South Tarawa.
Not surprisingly, for an island country like Kiribati, with a land area